She used to believe life would be gentle with her. As a child, she thought grown-ups had all the answers. She believed if you followed the rules, respected people, stayed honest, and worked hard, life would reward you with peace. Her mother used to say that patience turns pain into blessings, and her father believed silence was strength. She grew up carrying these words like a shield, unaware that some storms break through even the strongest beliefs. Her childhood was not perfect, but it was hopeful. Small house, loud laughter, dreams bigger than the rooms they lived in. She imagined a future where love felt safe, where marriage meant partnership, where effort was seen and valued. She never dreamed of luxury. She only wanted calm. She only wanted to feel chosen. School was her escape. Books were where she learned that struggles always had lessons and endings. Every story promised that pain led somewhere meaningful. She trusted those stories. She trusted life the same way. But life does not warn you when it is about to change. Her first disappointment came quietly. A friend she trusted shared her secrets with others. It was small, people said. Just words. But it was her first lesson that kindness does not always protect you. She cried that night, not because of the betrayal, but because she felt foolish for believing people would treat her heart carefully. Still, she didn't harden. She moved forward, carrying hope like a habit. College came with freedom and fear. She worked part-time jobs, stayed up late studying, dreamed of independence. She watched others fall in love easily, while she waited for something that felt right. She didn't want attention. She wanted intention. When she met him, she thought the waiting had meaning. He was calm, respectful, steady. He listened when she spoke. He admired her patience, her loyalty, her ability to endure. He made her feel seen. In the beginning, love felt simple. Safe conversations, shared plans, promises that sound believable. When he asked her to marry him, she believed this was the reward life gives to those who wait. Marriage changed things slowly. Not all at once. Not loudly. Responsibilities grew. Expectations shifted. Her sacrifices increased, while her voice became quieter. She told herself this was normal. Adjusting takes time. Love requires compromise. She learned to explain his silence, excuse his moods, minimize her own discomfort. Life does not become hard in one moment. It becomes hard in pieces. She started putting herself last without realizing it. Dreams were postponed. Opinions were softened. Needs were ignored. She believed endurance was love. She believed silence was maturity. But some nights, when the house was quiet, she felt an ache she could not explain. Not anger. Not sadness. Something deeper. A feeling that she was slowly disappearing inside a life she once prayed for. She told herself life is not perfect. She didn't yet understand that life was teaching her something far more painful. Life is not a bed of roses. Sometimes, it is the garden where you learn how many thorns you can touch before you finally stop smiling through the pain. And this was only the beginning. Marriage did not change her overnight. It changed her slowly. At first, it was the little things. The way decisions began to feel less shared and more assumed. The way her opinions were met with silence instead of conversation. She told herself that love grows quieter with time, that comfort replaces excitement, that this was what maturity looked like. She learned to adjust without realizing she was shrinking. Her days filled with responsibilities that never ended. Cooking meals that were eaten without comment. Cleaning a house that never felt like it belonged to her. Supporting dreams that were not her own. She told herself that contribution was love, that sacrifice made relationships stronger. But something inside her began to ache. He did not shout. He did not insult her openly. That made it harder to explain the loneliness. Friends would say she was lucky. Family would praise her patience. From the outside, everything looked stable, safe, respectable. Inside, she felt unseen. She started waking up tired, even after full nights of sleep. She laughed when required, nodded when expected, agreed when it was easier. Conversations became practical, not personal. Needs were postponed again and again until she forgot how to name them. There were moments she tried to speak. She would choose her words carefully, soften her tone, explain her feelings gently. And he would listen quietly, then change the subject, or promise to talk later. Later never came. Over time, she learned that silence could be louder than arguments. She stopped trying. Life began to feel like a routine she was performing rather than living. She measured her worth by how smoothly things ran, how little trouble she caused, how well she kept the peace. Her own happiness became something selfish she did not feel entitled to ask for. Sometimes she stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized herself. The dreams she once carried felt distant, almost childish. She wondered when she had decided that wanting more meant being ungrateful. She missed herself. But life does not pause for reflection. It keeps moving, demanding more, taking more. Responsibilities grew heavier. Emotional distance grew wider. And she kept telling herself that endurance was strength. There were nights she lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, wondering how two people could share a bed and feel so far apart. She wondered if this was all life had planned for her, if this quiet emptiness was the price of stability. She did not know yet that life was preparing her for a deeper lesson. Life is not a bed of roses. Sometimes it is a place where you are expected to keep standing even when your feet are bleeding because no one else can see the thorns. And she was still standing. When silence turns into loneliness. The hardest part was not the work she did every day. It was the feeling that none of it mattered. Over time, she realized she was no longer sharing a life. She was maintaining it. Her role had slowly shifted from partner to background support. Someone who kept things running while remaining invisible. She noticed how easily her presence was overlooked. How rarely her feelings were asked about. How often her exhaustion was mistaken for strength. She stopped expecting comfort. When something good happened to her, she shared it carefully, afraid it would sound unimportant. When something hurt her, she kept it inside, knowing it would be dismissed as overthinking. She learned to edit herself before speaking, to protect the peace that always seemed more valuable than her truth. The loneliness became familiar. She would sit at the dinner table across from him, listening to his plans, his concerns, his frustrations. She listened fully, attentively, the way she always had. But when she spoke, his attention drifted. Phone screens replaced eye contact. Silence replaced reassurance. It was then she understood something painful. Being needed is not the same as being loved. She began to feel lonely even in crowded rooms. Family gatherings made her feel smaller. Everyone praised how strong she was, how patient, how lucky. They did not see the quiet sadness behind her smile. They did not hear the questions she asked herself late at night. The moment she finally felt the weight. The realization did not arrive suddenly. It settled in slowly, like a heavy truth she could no longer ignore. One evening, she caught herself apologizing for feeling tired. Not for missing something important. Not for making a mistake. Just for being tired. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and when she heard them, something inside her cracked. She wondered when exhaustion became something she had to explain. That night, she sat alone in the living room long after everyone had gone to sleep. The house was quiet, but her mind was loud. She replayed years of moments she had ignored. The conversations she had softened. The boundaries she had lowered. The needs she had buried to keep everything calm. She realized she had spent so much time protecting everyone else's comfort that she had abandoned her own. There was no single act of betrayal she could point to.
No dramatic argument. No obvious villain.
That made the pain harder to justify. Harder to explain. Even to herself. But emotional neglect leaves marks that do not show on the surface. She started noticing how often she felt invisible. How decisions were made without her. How her presence was assumed, but her absence would have been felt only through inconvenience. She was valued for what she provided, not for who she was. That truth hurt more than anger ever could. She tried one last time to speak. Not with frustration. Not with blame. Just honesty. She explained how lonely she felt, how unseen, how tired. Her voice trembled, not because she was weak, but because she had held these words inside for too long. He listened quietly. Then he nodded. Then he said very little. And in that silence, she understood everything. Some people hear your pain, but do not feel responsible for it. Some people grow comfortable in your patience. Some people mistake endurance for consent. That night, she cried without hiding it. Not because she wanted attention, but because she could no longer carry the weight alone. She mourned the version of life she thought she was building. She mourned the woman she used to be before she learned how to disappear. But something else happened too. For the first time, she allowed herself to admit that she deserved more than survival. That peace should not require silence. That love should not feel like loneliness. Life is not a bed of roses. Sometimes, it is the moment you finally stop pretending the thorns don't hurt. And in that moment of pain, a quiet strength began to grow. The following days felt heavier than any before. Every room in the house seemed to hold echoes of her quiet despair. She moved through the motions of daily life, making breakfast, sending emails, folding laundry, but her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts lingered on that night, the one where she finally let herself feel, really feel. And for the first time in years, she considered a life where she did not have to tiptoe, where her voice mattered as much as anyone else's. She began noticing subtle changes in herself. A refusal to apologize unnecessarily. A refusal to downplay her own exhaustion. Simple acts, but revolutionary in her world. Standing up for herself in small ways. Choosing what to eat, deciding on a weekend plan, asking for help, felt like tiny sparks of rebellion. She realized courage is not always grand gestures. Sometimes courage is simply saying, I matter. At work, she started speaking up in meetings, sharing ideas she would have once swallowed in silence. She noticed colleagues nodding in agreement, respecting her opinion. That validation was foreign but empowering. She felt an unfamiliar thrill of confidence, like stepping into sunlight after years in the shade. At home, interactions remained strained, but she no longer allowed herself to shrink. When asked to take on tasks that felt unfair, she politely but firmly said no. She learned the difference between compromise and self-erasure. For the first time, she could see the difference. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the sunset, she thought of her past years, the sacrifices, the ignored needs, the quiet despair, and she felt anger rise. Not the explosive, destructive anger she feared, but a focused, purposeful anger. Anger that became fuel for change. She promised herself she would not disappear again, would not let her life be defined by endurance alone. She started journaling, writing every feeling, every small victory, every fear. The act of writing helped her see patterns, understand her emotions, and plot a path forward. It became her secret tool, her private rebellion against a life that had demanded silence for too long. And slowly, day by day, small choices became bigger ones. She considered therapy, explored new hobbies, even thought about friends she had neglected. Her world was expanding, not because anyone else allowed it, but because she chose it. The turning point was quiet, almost imperceptible. There was no dramatic confrontation, no stormy argument. Just a woman who finally recognized her own worth and began living in alignment with it. And in that recognition, a seed of hope was planted, a hope she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Life had not magically become easier. Pain and disappointment still existed, but she carried a new tool, her own courage. And for the first time, she realized that surviving was not enough. She deserved to thrive. By the time she reached this stage of her journey, the woman had transformed in ways subtle but profound. She no longer measured her worth by the opinions of others or the constraints that once confined her. Every day had become an exercise in reclaiming herself, from making decisions independently to embracing small joys that had once seemed forbidden. She still remembered the nights of tears, the endless questions about what she could have done differently, the moments when fear threatened to pull her back into old patterns. But now, those memories were lessons, not prisons. Each hardship she had endured had carved out resilience within her, a quiet power that could not be taken away. One morning, as sunlight poured through her window, she stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs. The city around her moved at its usual chaotic pace, indifferent to her past struggles, yet she felt at peace. She had learned that peace was not the absence of hardship, but the presence of self-trust and courage. Her journey was far from over. Life still offered challenges, some expected, some sudden, but she approached them differently now. Where she once had hesitation, she now had deliberation. Where she once feared judgment, she now sought truth. And most importantly, she had discovered a kind of freedom that came not from escaping life's hardships, but from embracing her own strength to navigate them. She began to share her story with others, quietly at first, then more openly. Friends, family, and strangers listened, sometimes crying with her, sometimes thanking her for the courage to speak truths they themselves had buried. In doing so, she realized that pain, when faced and understood, could become a source of connection and empowerment. And so, she moved forward, not as someone who had merely survived, but as someone who had reclaimed her life, step by step. Her days were no longer a series of compromises. They were filled with intention, choice, and the quiet joy of self-respect. And even in moments of uncertainty, she smiled, knowing that life, though never a bed of roses, had given her the strength to bloom in her own time.